On today's episode of Locked On NHL, the Edmonton Oilers, what is going on there? The Colorado Avalanche injured, but in a playoff position. And to wrap up today's episode, the Vancouver Canucks, what would you do to help them get through this season? All that much more in today's episode of Locked On NHL.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Western Conference Tuesdays, because we love alliteration. I am joined here by Dane Lewis from Locked On Stars. I am Brett Holden from Locked On Oilers. Dane, how are you doing today?
Doing good. I know we were just talking about the World Cup final before we hit record. Just a nice time of the year if you're a sports fan, whether you're into soccer, football, college football, NFL, and the NHL season picking up and kind of hitting its stride. And we're kind of starting to see who some of the real teams are, like we talked about last week, and a ton of really interesting races in terms of the playoffs and playoff seeding, but also from a player perspective as well, because there's some players that are doing some special things on the ice right now, and it's been a ton of fun to watch.
Oh, absolutely. And like you said, sports fan, you got soccer, NFL, college, everything. How could you not love sports right now? What are you doing? Either way, let's get into our sports talk with the Western Conference. As we talked about, we're gonna start off with the Oilers. Something's going on there. There's not a whole bunch of things connecting up. We'll talk about that in a second. Also, on today's episode, the Colorado Avalanche have a ton of injuries, but are still finding ways to win. They're currently in a playoff spot as we speak. How are they doing that, especially coming from an Edmonton Oilers host? And to wrap up today's episode, the Vancouver Canucks are doing Vancouver Canucks things. But once the calendar turns, what can they do to help out the rest of their season? Either way, thank you so much for making Locked On NHL your first listen today and every day. We are free and available wherever you find your podcast. Dane, let's get into those Edmonton Oilers, as last night they were going into Nashville. The mayor of Nashville was coming into town. Leon Draisaitl, heading into the game, had 10 points in 6 periods against the Nashville Predators. However, he was held pointless in the Music City last night, and the Edmonton Oilers lose 4-3 in overtime. After that loss, the Edmonton Oilers now occupy the final wild card spot and are only a point safe in that wild card spot. Dane, I know I'm the Oilers host, but from the Stars perspective, from the outside perspective, what do you think is going on from the Edmonton Oilers, or with the Edmonton Oilers?
Yeah, there's absolutely a lot to unpack there. And I mean, it's, not the easiest to take in from the Central Division, because you don't obviously catch as many Oilers games, but they do find themselves on national TV quite a bit. So there's, every few weeks you get the opportunity to watch them play. And it's really kind of shocking, just given the performance of the best players on the team. Connor McDavid having maybe his best season of all time, but I feel like it's not quite getting talked about enough, just because people are, this is what you expect from the guy who's been considered the best in the league for the past 4 or 5 seasons. And Leon Draisaitl right there behind him at 54 points. And I think really the problem starts to reveal itself when you start to look at the point spread under those two, because the production just doesn't quite seem to be the same. And you would, again, expect that with 2 of the best players on the planet leading the way. And then maybe the depth just, I don't know, hasn't come to fruition this season. Of course, you have some goaltending issues as well. I know Jack Campbell was supposed to come in this offseason, picked up in free agency, maybe supposed to be kind of the answer, but really just hasn't appeared to be that way for this Oilers team. And so it's really interesting to watch. And I know, I'm sure it's frustrating for Oilers fans and that whole community up in Edmonton, because you have the talent, and obviously this team went to the Western Conference Finals last season. I don't think that was a fluke or a mistake. I mean, they not necessarily dominated, but found ways to win in those first 2 rounds of the playoffs, a close best of 7 game 7 series against the Kings, and then actually did, I would say, dominate the Calgary Flames in round 2. But I don't really know. I don't know if it's an early season slump and maybe things will get going after the All-Star break. I feel like there's always one or two teams that seem to find their footing after the break and just flip that switch. But I know you might have a little bit more insight, but it's really perplexing from kind of an outsider's perspective to see the talent on this roster and yet again see them, like you said, in that last playoff spot and just barely hanging on by a thread, it seems.
Yeah, well, heading into not last week, but the week before, the Edmonton Oilers were missing Kyler Yamamoto, Ryan McLeod, Evander Kane. We all know what happened there, but Warren Fogle was also injured. He's making his way back into the lineup. Kyler Yamamoto is also in the lineup, and the Edmonton Oilers have had a lot of injury issues to go through this season, but the Edmonton Oilers defense, you mentioned Jack Campbell. You know what? He had a good game against the Predators last night, stopped 31 of 35. But all the goals that he allowed were, you'll give him the overtime goal. He was left for basically dead. It was a 2-on-1 in overtime, a bad change. Carrier roofs it, they win. It is what it is. You can only do so much as a goaltender. But then the other goals, two of them were point shots that just found their way through. And the first goal of the game was a rebound that found Matthias Ekholm's stick. The Oilers' team defense, has not done anything to help Jack Campbell, especially. But Stuart Skinner has been able to kind of ride the ship, let them know, okay, this is kind of, you got to figure it out. I mean, the Oilers lost in a 47 save performance from Stuart Skinner. You got to give your goaltender some sort of leeway when he's doing that much for you. It's unfortunate because the Edmonton Oilers need to make a move here. Their defense, as mentioned, has not been great. Darnell Nurse has been crucified in the local media this past week. I mean, never mind, literally ever since Jordan Greenway said, "Oh, you make $9 million for nothing," which is comical coming from a guy with 2 points in 20 games now, I believe. But either way, now you're sitting here going, your number one defenseman isn't fantastic. Your top pairing hasn't been fantastic. You haven't changed your defense, really. Now, Philip Broberg and Ryan Murray are out for at least a month with injuries to themselves. What do you do? Now every defenseman that you're playing against that you're tied to, like what's his name? John Klingberg. That's what I was looking for. Cam Fowler and Matthias Ekholm all have scored on you. Meanwhile, your defensemen are going, there are a lot of issues with the Oilers, and you sit there and go, can this team be a playoff team?
Yeah, it really is like we both said, perplexing, and certainly seems like they need to go out and make some sort of move before or at the deadline. And again, you would have maybe a little more insight of what the cap space looks like and what players could be on the radar. But that really just seems like the answer right now. That mixed with wait for some of these other players to get back to full health. And especially a guy like Evander Kane. I know he's a pretty controversial player to talk about in general, but you can't deny that when he's playing good, he can certainly be, one of the better top 6 players in this division and in the Western Conference.
Well, and something that really shocks me about Evander Kane before we move on to the Colorado Avalanche, what really impresses me with Evander Kane is everybody knows his scoring prowess. Everybody knows his grit, what he brings to a team. But what not enough people mention is what he does in his own end. For the Edmonton Oilers, while he was still healthy, he was in the top 3 when it comes to goals against per 60 minutes at 5-on-5 for the Edmonton Oilers. And right now, still, despite being out, he currently sits 4th on the Edmonton Oilers in goals against per 60 minutes at a 1.65. I'm going to tell you right now that the closest defenseman in that area is 7th, and that's Cody Ceci. The top 6 are Devon Shore, Klim Kostin, Kyler Yamamoto, Evander Kane, Derek Ryan, and Matthias Janmark. That's a little bit of an issue. So Evander Kane really brings a lot more to not only scoring, but playing in his own end as well. And that is what the Edmonton Oilers are really missing right now. Injuries and losses for the Edmonton Oilers. However, injuries and victories for the Colorado Avalanche. How are they doing it? And what's really the driving force to these wins for the defending Stanley Cup champions? We will talk about that in just a second. But first, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball. And despite the World Cup just wrapping up, the Premier League and all of the club leagues are coming back. I think the Premier League is coming back Boxing Day. What's a better gift than Premier League football? Either way, they've got it all at Bet Online. Plus, if you love sports podcasts, which if you're listening to Dane and I, you probably do, you can find those at Bet Online as well. They are the fastest and easiest way to getting all of your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet Online, where the game starts. Alrighty, Dane, where we are going to continue with our show is with the Colorado Avalanche, as the Colorado Avalanche now are are tied with the Edmonton Oilers in the wild card spot, but are above them in the wild card race. They have a mountain of injuries. Yes, I said a mountain for the Avalanche. That was probably not the best, but they are still fighting for wins and winning. Dane, what is going on in the Mile High City? Mile High City? One of those two.
Yes.
I'm not American.
Locked on Avalanche is going to find this, and we're both going to get a DM correcting us on the terminology, but that's probably for the better. Or maybe Avalanche fans will themselves. I know I've had my fair share of run-ins with some Avs fans this season, but yeah, it's been really interesting to see how things have unfolded in Colorado. I mean, they come in as defending champs, so of course you expect there to maybe be a backslide here and there. I mean, it's hard to repeat as champion, and it's hard for any team to be competitive and be at the top of their game for an 82 game season, whether you're healthy or not. And like we've both said, I mean, this team just absolutely loaded with injuries. Their captain, Gabriel Landeskog, has yet to play this season. Nathan McKinnon has recently been injured. I know at one point they were without Valerie Nichushkin. They have a few defensemen on IR, and I think a few guys on long-term IR as well. And so it really seems like the cornerstones of this team have been Cale Makar and Mikko Rantanen. I think both those guys have played most of, if not all of the games this season. And I think obviously having guys like that are a huge reason why they continue to win some games. But then you also have the goaltending, which was a little bit of a question mark coming into this season. You have Darcy Kemper going to Washington over the summer after winning the Cup, and then they get Alexander Georgiev from the New York Rangers, and he's come in and he's been nothing short of spectacular for this Avalanche team, having watched several games of the Avalanche, but especially two where they played the Dallas Stars. I mean, he was excellent in both of those outings and shut them down, and he shut down a lot of other really good teams. I know last night the Avalanche won in a 1-0 shootout over the New York Islanders. I mean, the Islanders certainly not the offensive juggernaut of the league, but they're having a nice season. They're near the top, or actually looking now, they've dropped a little bit in fifth in the Metro, but certainly a good team. And I mean, I think that is a big part of it, is the goaltending. Georgiev and then even Pavel Francouz, the backup, had some nice moments down the stretch last season for the Avs and is having some nice moments here this season. So I think it's just a mixture of the goaltending and then also some of these other guys, some of these role players stepping up into big roles while they're waiting for some of their key players to come back into the lineup and come back into the roster. I mean, it's a talented team and it's a very deep team. And I think they proved that last season in their playoff run. I mean, basically unstoppable until they got to the Stanley Cup Finals. And even then, even though it was a 6-game series, seemed like they rolled fairly easily. And I think a lot of that had to do with the depth that they had on that team. And so certainly not an ideal situation for them right now, is like you said, they're kind of in the same spot as the Oilers as far as standings and points. But I bet if you were to gauge both fan bases, I think the Avalanche fans might feel a little bit more confident about where their team will finish the regular season. And if they're a fully healthy team come playoff time, regardless of seeding, I think they can absolutely make some noise and make another deep run.
Yeah, and I mean, first of all, how exhilarating must have that game been? It was 1-0 in the shootout, but hey, a win's a win. That's the thing. You get points, you move on, and you go to the next game. And that is exactly the mindset that the Colorado Avalanche have had this season. Now, you mentioned Georgiev. I mean, I'm looking at his stats right now, and it is as an Edmonton Oilers host, I'm sitting here going, what is going on here? A 2.46 goals against average and a 0.923 save percentage. That is good for seventh in the league right now. And hey, moving into this season, everybody was going, you mentioned, hey, Kemper's gone. Francouz had this big playoffs for us. As soon as you went down, we're going to probably ride with him for a while. Georgiev comes in after a tough year in New York. Everybody wants Igor. He had a sub 900 save percentage. Now he comes in here and he's in the top 15, and he's only in the top 10, and he's only seventh right now because Matt Murray with 11 games is in there, and Ilya Samsonov is in there with 12. Not to take away from their seasons as well, but I mean, Kochetkov has 14, but other than that, Georgiev, Sorokin, Halibut, and Ullmark all have over 20 games played so far this year, and those are the guys that are currently ahead of Georgiev. So, I mean, you're getting goaltending, you're getting defense. I mean, have we even mentioned Cale Makar yet? I mean, and that's the thing. You mentioned their depth. They are absolute. I mean, look at the addition of Evan Rodriguez, who was also injured for the last couple of weeks, had a goal and I believe 2 goals and an assist over the last couple of games here. And guys like that are what help you win games. I mean, we were just talking about the Edmonton Oilers. I mean, outside of Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, maybe Zach Hyman, maybe Ryan Nugent Hopkins, they're getting goals. But after that, is it Matthias Janmark? No. You take a look at the Colorado Avalanche. They got Rantanen, Makar, McKinnon, and then it goes Lehkonen, Devon Taves, Valerie Nichushkin, and JT Compher all in the top 6 and 7 in points, and then Alex Newhook. They're getting points from players that they need to get points from, and they're getting contributions from players they need to get contributions from. So, Dane, we're about to flip the script on the calendar here. Where do you see the Colorado Avalanche finishing here, especially considering they're probably going to be full strength by February, maybe?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and not just on the front of the Avalanche themselves, but on some of the other teams in the Central Division. The Minnesota Wild were off to a rough start to the season, but now they're third in the division and are playing really well. They've won 5 in a row, so it's going to be an interesting race. And of course, the Winnipeg Jets surprising a ton of people this season. And I really think the top 4 in the Central right now, the Stars, Jets, Wild, and Avalanche, those are probably the 4 teams that are going to be circulating the playoff race and will likely, I think, make the playoffs. Maybe the Blues can sneak in there at the end if they can find a way to rally. But I realistically can see the Avalanche, once they're fully healthy, I don't really see a reason why they can't battle their way back into maybe the second spot in the division or maybe even the first. I mean, I feel like Stars have done a good job holding that spot for the majority of the season. And obviously, I'm going to be a little bit biased towards that team, but it's no doubt in my mind that this Avalanche team is talented enough and deep enough to push their way back to the top of the Central Division. And maybe depending on what happens out in the Pacific, they could find themselves maybe with the best record in the entire Western Conference. I mean, I just think they're that good of a team. They lose a few guys this offseason like Nazem Kadri, Darcy Kemper, but they've shown this season that they can still win games. They can still be a highly competitive team no matter who they put out there on the ice. And I think that that's going to create a lot of problems down the stretch for teams in the Central Division and teams in the Western Conference come playoff time. And yeah, I mean, it all starts with their star players and when they're at their best, when McKinnon's at his best, Makar's at his best, Rantanen, Georgiev. I mean, not many teams can go toe to toe with that and expect to come out on top.
100%. And that's scary. That's the scary thing about that Colorado Avalanche is that they can come back and potentially be the best team in the Western Conference just because their other players have been able to hold the fort until the reinforcements are back. The English are coming. The English are coming. But really, it's the Avalanche are coming, and potentially in waves. Either way, one team who is not arriving in waves, and that is the Vancouver Canucks, as they are still hippity hopping their way around the bottom of the NHL standings. So, what would we do to help the Vancouver Canucks just keep their head above water until potentially the NHL draft lottery? We will talk about that in just a second. But first, I want to thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Now, for your second listen, make sure you tune in to Locked On Sports Today, the biggest stories around the sports world in 20 minutes or less, plus instant reactions, game recaps, and Locked On's take of the day. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and wherever you find your podcasts. Dane, the Vancouver Canucks, kind of the story of the season a little bit, as they had that weird historic run at the start of the season, and now we are 30, they're 31 games into the season. We're at least 30 games into the season for every team in the NHL. They currently sit sixth in the Pacific Division, above San Jose and Anaheim, and that wasn't always the case. They are only 3 points above San Jose, and there's a lot of turmoil within the organization. First of all, Dane, what do you kind of make of this situation with Vancouver right now?
Yeah, it's so weird to see this happen because I think a lot of people were very high on this team coming in. They kind of had a nice end to last season, obviously not making the playoffs, but I mean, I remember watching, every Stars game for sure, but even other Western Conference games and keeping track of the race because it kind of came down to Dallas, Vegas, Vancouver, Winnipeg. Those were kind of the last four teams in the Western Conference hanging around for that last potential wild card spot. And the Canucks hung around a lot longer than I think most people would have expected them to at the start of last season. And they return essentially the same team. Bruce Boudreau comes back after stepping in the middle of last season and leading this team to seemingly new heights that, again, a lot of people did not think that they could reach last season. Elias Pettersson, Bo Horvat, JT Miller, Quinn Hughes. I mean, it's hard as a coach and a fan base, I'm sure, to not be excited about a core of those players. You have Thatcher Demko, who was one of the better goalies last season. I think certainly under the radar, but now you're looking at him this season, and like you said, they come out just at a astonishingly new low, it seemed, to start the season, and just really haven't been able to make up a ton of ground. I mean, they have flashes here and there, but all in all, I mean, just a disappointing season, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly one thing that's gone wrong with this team because there are still some nice pieces. Bo Horvat is one of the leading scorers in the NHL as far as goals, and I mean, you're still seeing some good production from Miller and Pettersson, but then you also have guys like Brock Besser who seem unhappy in their situation, not producing like we know that they can. Connor Garland seeing a little bit of a step back from last season as well. It's perplexing to say the least. And I mean, I think it was last week they were on one of the TNT national broadcast against Calgary, and they looked really good in that game. But then you watch another game and they'll look the exact opposite, where none of their shots are going into the back of the net. They can't defend to save their lives, and it's just back and forth, Jekyll and Hyde, it seems, with this team.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's the thing. I mean, that's kind of been their quota this entire year. It looked good, and then when it comes to the summary, not so much. They started off, think about the first game of the season, well, first 10 games of the season. How many times were they up and they would then blow the lead and lose it in overtime or regulation? That's what happened with the Oilers the first game of the season. That's what happened all the way through. And then now you're sitting there going, we either have loser points or we don't have any points at all out of these first few games. And you mentioned all those big names for the Canucks: Bo Horvat, Brock Besser, all of these players who are sitting here, JT Miller even, and you're going, can they move on from them? And that's concerning. Bo Horvat is your captain. Brock Besser has given everything he possibly can to this organization. He's going through a tough time. I mean, we saw the emotion that he had after losing his father and having the conversations with the media of his father walking out on that end of the season press conference, and a very emotional scene. And it's unfortunate, but now you're sitting here realizing the reality in it all and going, well, the only way that this team is going to get better is by moving pieces like those. So, Dane, if you were the Vancouver Canucks, who are you moving? Who are you trying to compensate this roster with? And who are you really trying to kind of move on from, maybe?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of ways you can go with that. And I think if you're a Canucks fan or someone who loves his team, follows his team, it might not be the easiest thing to wrap your mind around or really even accept, because I know no one wants to see their team lose, especially with the plethora of talent they have on the roster. But especially this season, I mean, I think realistically, unless something just miraculous happens, the Canucks likely not making the playoffs. And so clearly you're not going to see the roster necessarily commit to a tank, because there's always going to be guys fighting for, the next job or the next contract, or looking, especially younger guys on the team, looking to gain the respect of the locker room and the coaching staff. But there's also some sense of, okay, if it's not the greatest year, maybe we find ourselves in the draft lottery. Who knows what pick you get if you land there? And I mean, you could get a franchise altering player. It's not just Connor Bedard, right? There's several other players coming up in this draft that are expected to be, cornerstone franchise pieces. And so I think there is some solace in that Canucks fans and people around this organization can maybe rest in, even though that's seems like a far ways away. I mean, that's something to potentially look forward to with the season that certainly has not gone to plan. But as far as what they can do right now, I mean, I think absolutely you have to look to move some pieces. And I know there's been no shortage of rumors and murmurs about some guys getting moved on this team. And I know Brock Besser has kind of been at the center of that. And it's, kind of a touchy subject. Like you said, I know it's a lot more than just he's not playing well on the ice and seemingly unhappy with the team. A lot of other things going on in his personal life as well, which I can't even imagine trying to manage that while being a professional athlete. But I mean, if you're looking to be competitive or looking to build for the future, I think you got to try to move some of those guys like Besser and maybe some other veterans on this team that maybe they're either in some of their better days or some of their better days maybe behind them, and try to build up some capital for the future, whether that's draft picks, whether that's promising prospects that you can look to add to the core, maybe guys that won't make an immediate impact, but moves that you can make that, 1, 2, maybe 3 seasons from now, you look back and say, yeah, that was a rough time in the 22-23 season, but we had to cut ties with some players, maybe make some adjustments on the roster and in the depth chart and in the locker room. And now you maybe see some of that fruit start to grow. And then you really start to see some of the guys like Miller, Hughes, Pedersen take that next step into becoming NHL superstars. Because I think those guys are great. And I think they're on the cusp of becoming, some of the premier players in the league.
Well, and you mentioned it, and I want to go back to the draft, and let's be real, that's probably where Vancouver should be focusing their attention right now. So you have these pieces, you have the Bo Horvats, the Brock Bessers. Who else can you probably move? Tyler Myers, you probably should move. The should and could are two different things. There are tons of guys on this team, but you're telling me you can't get at least one first rounder for Brock Besser, if not two. I mean, this guy's in his career, I mean, has proven that he can score 29 goals in 2017, 26 in 2018, and he can get more. He's a very good shooter, a very good goal scorer. You're telling me you can't get one, if not two, first round picks for Brock Besser? Bo Horvat, who's having a fantastic season, is only bringing his stock up. And then you sit here, and I had to bring up some of the draft prospects here. I mean, you're telling me that you can't maybe walk out of the season with maybe 4 first round picks in this year's draft? Maybe a little bit of a stretch, but if you're a team like the Vancouver Canucks, who from day one have had issues this season, you might as well try and look. I mean, you got guys like Connor Bedard, Adam Fantilli. Matvei Michkov has gone from a potential, is he going to go first overall with Connor Bedard, to a fourth, fifth, maybe even 10th round pick. Maybe he's having a fall like a Vasily Podkolzin because of his contract status in Russia. Maybe, I mean, you have guys like Ilya Mikheyev, Andrei Kuzmenko also in your organization. That may be a very present name in the organization right now. Zach Benson from Winnipeg in the WHL right now, having a very good, another very good season with the Ice there. You have tons of guys here and those are only players in the top potentially 10. You haven't even mentioned Edward Saul, Braden Yeager as well. These are all guys who can come in and potentially help the team. Maybe not next year, but in the next 2 years as well, and really be prominent in the team. And those are names that you can start building around. Haven't even mentioned Connor Bedard really in this conversation. So you need to make moves for the future if you're the Vancouver Canucks. Bo Horvat, I'm sorry, and you know what? He's not happy right now that all of this has come out, and because he's a professional, he's a captain of the team. But you're sitting there and you're going, okay, well, Bo, you have to go now. Nothing that you haven't done for us on the ice. It's just we can't do anything more for you right now. We want you to have the best possible career you can, and you're swinging above our weight class right now. So, Bo, get us as much as you can for right now. That is the best thing you can do as a Vancouver Canuck captain, is give us everything you possibly can in a trade. Same with Brock Besser. Get him a new situation. And these aren't personal things. These aren't because Brock Besser is a cancer in the locker room, is going out after games and partying and blah 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 blah. No, it's because these are good guys in the organization. These are guys who deserve a shot somewhere else. And the only thing you can do in return is get first round picks, get prospects in return, players who can help you maybe today, but more or less down the road. I mean, you have the pieces for success down the road. You got Quinn Hughes. Andre Kuzmenko has been a very good player for them so far this year. I mean, you have Ilya Mikheyev for another 3 years, I believe. That's a big acquisition in the offseason. And you make that because you think you're going to be competitive this year, and everybody thought you were going to be competitive this year. Thatcher Demko's been injured. Spencer Martin's been playing for them there. So you kind of cut your losses and try and find some sort of players. I mean, I one of my favorite players right now for the Vancouver Canucks is a guy who's playing on mostly their fourth line in Dakota Joshua. But you have guys like him that are proving that they can play in this league in suppressed roles. And now you see that, okay, maybe we do have a little bit of something going with some of these players. Find the talent that that can help you in the future, but move on those maybe dead pieces, those dead spots, and help recoup anything you possibly can. Now, to wrap up today, I'm gonna maybe get a little controversial, but I'll toss this to you, Dane, so I get some of the heat off of me, but I still ask the question. Brock Besser out of Vancouver, probably by the trade deadline. Bo Horvat out of Vancouver, probably by the trade deadline. I know a lot of people were talking about, oh, will Quinn Hughes resign? Will he stay with Vancouver? All this and that. My question is, Elias Pettersson. Yes, he is a fantastic player and probably the best player in Vancouver right now. I mean, he leads the team in points with 13 goals, 21 assists, 34 points. But at what point does Elias Pettersson sit there and go, my best friend in Brock Besser is going, our captain and Bo Horvat is going. I mean, I have been as good as I possibly can over the last couple of years, and I'm still sitting here in basically the exact same spot that I've been in since I came into this organization. When does Elias Pettersson move on?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I'm sure any Vancouver Canucks fans listening just are shaking in their boots thinking of that possibility of one, him leaving, on top of the fact that it seems likely that Besser and Horvat could be gone by the trade deadline this season. And it's one of those things where he looks at the situation, and if the team moves on from those guys at the deadline and they're still not being competitive in that Pacific Division, if they're still not making the playoffs, or if they're barely getting in and getting swept in round one, I mean, I think if you're Pedersen, you got to look out for your best interest and where you can best make an impact. Because, like you said, he's probably their best player. If you're a Canucks fan, you can't say, "Well, this team's struggling because Pedersen hasn't done enough." I mean, he's doing everything he can for this team, scoring goals, setting up his teammates, and being one of the more underrated players in the league. So I think at some point you have to say, "Okay, I know what I'm capable of, and I know what I'm worth." And obviously, I think that he could make some decent money in Vancouver long term if he wanted to stay there, because I think that, a guy of his talent, they'd probably be willing to pay him. But also, you can look at other organizations that also have money, but maybe also have a better team chemistry in the locker room, maybe better leadership on the coaching staff, and also a better opportunity to be competitive and potentially win a Stanley Cup. Because at the end of the day, that's what every player in this league is after. I mean, you can talk about money or location, and of course, some of those things do factor into player decisions, but especially at the deadline, I mean, I think that we could very well see a guy like Horvat go to a team like the Avalanche or a team out east, which is just absolutely terrifying to see all these juggernaut teams. And if they add a player like Horvat who has 22 goals in 31 games this season, I mean, it's unbelievable. And I think the same can be said for Pettersson. I mean, you look down the line, a few years down the line, and you add him to maybe an up and coming team. I think a team like Detroit out east could be really good in a few seasons. And even
Carolina?
yeah, Carol. Yeah, I mean, it really Eastern Conference, especially, and I think that might be a little bit easier to swing a trade there. Hard to do it in your own division with a ton of rivalries, and then the Central Division. I just don't. I don't know. At least at this time, where he might could land there. But yeah, Carolina, Detroit. I think even a team like Ottawa, who's not great this season, but certainly starting to trend in the right direction after being at the bottom for a little bit. I mean, they went out this past off season and were one of the more active teams and added plenty of young talent. And I think Pettersson could look really good with any of those teams. And there's probably a few that I'm forgetting right now that you plug him in there and he's just an instant success and finds a way to contribute in the top six somewhere in the NHL. So it's a scary thought for Vancouver Canucks fans for sure. And so you have to hope that whatever gets done at the deadline this year benefits your team and that they can find a way to make things work with the draft picks they get, the prospects they potentially get in return. Because if you're Vancouver, you want to hold on to Pettersson as long as you can.
100%. All righty. Dane, let's wrap it up there as let's summarize here. Vancouver, the sky is falling. Edmonton, the pieces of the sky are starting to fall. And in Colorado, they're fine. Everybody calm down. Like, what are we doing here? Either way, let's wrap it up there. Dane, where can everybody find you? Social media, your show, everything like that.
Yeah, they can find me on Twitter, just at Dane, 2 underscores, and my last name, Lewis. And they can find Locked On Stars, Twitter, Instagram, just type in the name Locked On Stars. And of course, the podcast is free and available on YouTube and on any podcasting platform out there. And I know you and I will probably be talking about similar things on our own respective shows with the Stars and Oilers going at it head to head on Wednesday night. A late puck drop, 8:30 Central Time in Texas, but a TNT broadcast, national TV, Robertson versus McDavid. So tons to talk about there, and you can't ask for much more if you're a fan of goal scoring and just high octane offense from those two players.
A lot of offense, not a lot of defense. Either way, you can find me personally at the real Holden 40 on everything. I'm talking Twitter, I'm talking Instagram. I'm pretty sure my MySpace is still the real Holden 40 as well. You can find me there as well. And you don't care about me, you care about the show. So you can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Oilers. Exactly how it sounds. And if you want to watch, actually not if you want to watch, you should be subscribing to Locked On Oilers on YouTube because you get to see obscure jerseys like this one, our little Texas Stars Jack Campbell jersey.
Oh, yeah.
So shout out Jack Campbell. Shout out Texas Stars. How about that?
Oh,
Showing
yeah.
a little love to your end of the woods, eh?
Yeah, Jack Campbell, drafted by the Stars however many years ago and never actually played a game for the NHL club. So how about that?
That's what I'm talking about. That's called development. We'll wrap it up there. Either way, thank you so much for joining us on Western Conference Tuesdays. We will be back next Tuesday, I believe. I think that is the 27th, so we might as well. It's not a special day yet. It's my birthday the day after, but that's okay. Either way, let's wrap it up there, folks. Thank you so much for joining us, and we shall see you soon.